Hello, welcome to the second panel of the day. Just a reminder, people who weren't at the last panel, this is the last panel of the day, and tomorrow we'll have more panels in the tent, or if it's raining, in circuit, and definitely rain or shine in circuit. We have a panel, a workshop in the morning at 11:30 with James Laxton, the cinematographer of If Beale Street Could Talk, which is playing very soon, and Ashley Connor, the cinematographer of Madeline's Madeline, and they'll be talking about their approach to cinematography and lighting different skin tones. So it's a really wonderful opportunity. That and this and all of these talks are sponsored by the Hohenberg Foundation, which we're very grateful for. Sure. So thank you for coming out tonight. This panel is when to stay in your lane and when to swerve. And there's that phrase, staying in your lane, that our moderator will, I'm sure, go more into. And I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator right now, Kristen Warner. She's an associate professor at the University of Alabama. She's the author of The Cultural Politics of Colorblind TV Casting, and she is our moderator extraordinaire this weekend. And I will now turn it over to Kristen. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Miriam, and welcome everyone to when to stay in your lane and when to swerve. And so let me introduce our panelists. To my right, this is my right hand. To my right, I sometimes can't tell, is Kay Austin Collins, a film critic for Vanity Fair. Then there's Brandon Wilson, who's the director and writer of Sepulveda, as well as a lecturer at UCLA and Columbia College Hollywood. And last but not least, we have Sebastián Silva, who's the director of Tyrel, which is playing tonight. All right, so I want to sort of kick it off. Brandon, you want to sort of talk about sort of the inspiration behind the panel. We were talking about it before we got started, but I think that'd be a good way to get us thinking about what this is about.
Well, so my film Sepulveda that just played this morning, it was a film that kind of came out of an experience where a former student, I used to teach high school, reached out to me, and I had an old idea, and I thought, okay, this will work, and I really I shaped it around her and two of her friends. Now they're all Latina. I'm not Latino. My wife ended up joining as a co-director, and it was a wonderful experience. I mean, I know them well. I've seen them grow up from being kids into women, so that paid off, and it was a great experience. But when it came time for film festivals, I found, well, first we were accepted into Urban World, and that was wonderful. But after that, we kind of hit a wall in terms of some African American festivals, either without saying it or sometimes actually spelling it out, we're not really sure what to make of our film because we are black and the leads aren't. And so do you put in a film in a sort of black festival where there's 3 Latinas and it really isn't much in the way of discussion of sort of, the black experience or what have you. And for me, I've been doing this long enough. I knew that if the same film was made by a non-black director with 3 black actresses, it would be getting into all the black festivals without any problems and probably even winning awards. I know that because I've seen it. So I just really made me think a lot. And in the Latino festivals, we didn't really have much luck with either. Now, could be that my film's too arty for them or for these particular festivals, but it just made me think about how artists, especially artists of color, are sort of a little bit asked to stay within certain parameters and be very political. Because I've had people either ask me outright on social media or sort of hint at, like, well, why is it that you have these 3 Latinas in your movie, and why couldn't it have been 3 black girls? And I just, thought, well, that's because this is the movie that was in front of me, and I decided to make it rather than, go off and find 3 actresses that I didn't have the same connection with because they weren't my students, and make an inferior film just because of what, because of some, optics or something. So that's kind of where we got started. I sort of where I started really thinking about this question. And stay in your lane is a real go-to on social media. People like to throw that at people all the time. It's really kind of a pat kind of response to, I think, a question to issues that are a lot more complicated. So that's kind of why the panel is happening, because I think it's something to really think about and talk about, because I don't think it's simple as one side, well, this is wrong and that's it, good night, but it's something I think that it bears some exploring.
Okay, so that's a good start. Let's unpack it a little bit then. So what do you think are the anxieties around people telling you to stay in your lane, that a movie like Sepulveda or a movie like Tyrel, that features a lead black actor who is surrounded by these white characters, and like what are the anxieties around what people fear about what these movies might do, or something of that respect? Either,
Me?
yeah, whoever, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's a fear of offending, and the fear of being offended, I think like it's grown huge in America, especially lately, and like, I did not make Tyrel to cross a line that I shouldn't. I was not trying to break any sort of boundaries in that sense. Like, in my particular case, I've explored many times, this is my 7th feature, and I've explored many times the alienation as a subject, like otherness, the desire to belong and not being able to, and like, so a black guy going to a birthday party upstate New York among white people, it's pretty much like a straight up case of alienation, Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I liked, and then again, everything, like, for me, appropriation is a very tricky word, because whatever you've witnessed and whatever the sort of emotional or psychological closeness that you feel that you have to a particular subject belongs to you, and there's nobody out there to tell you that it doesn't, and it's really up to you to be responsible and careful enough to be informed, on what are you doing, and there's a lot of people out there that can help you, I did know, of course, that I was stepping into tricky territories when I started writing Tyrel, and I consulted with black friends, and I have to say that I learned that nobody had the same opinion either, so you learn also that what is called the black experience, it was a very particular experience for every black person that I talked to. And like, some people found it kind of an impossible situation for a black man to go to a weekend upstate without asking whether there would be any other black people at the party. And some other black friends of mine were like, I would never ask that. I would never even, I wouldn't even be concerned whether I'll be the only black person. So then you start learning that, that there isn't such a thing as like one route, and that you just got to be true to your character. And I think that if you are building up a fleshed out character filled with contradictions, and you think you know your character, that character should be Tyler. And he happens to be a black man in America, which does means a lot, but he's Tyler before he's black, I think, to me, And that goes for every character that I've ever built, I used to write a lot of women, and, I do have my feminine side, but I'm not a woman. And I felt very compelled to portray the drama of these characters. And they happened to be a woman, but they were, again, Raquel was the name of my character, and she was Raquel before she was a woman, and she was Raquel before she was a maid. So, and like, I have to say, under my experience, I haven't shown this movie that much. I showed it in Sundance this year in January, and it's gone to some other festivals, but I haven't been there to really talk about it so much. I was at the Urban World Film Festival, and like the movie was received with a lot of love, and nobody seems to be have any aversion to me having made that movie. Maybe it's because I'm Latino, you know? Maybe it's if I had been a white American, maybe it would have been different. Who knows?
Brandon, Cameron, y'all want to jump in?
I mean, clearing my throat. Brandon, I'm listening to your experience about submitting your film to festivals, and it is just so strange to me that a black film festival would look at the work of a black director and decide that it's not about the right thing. It's not appropriate because it's not about blackness in a specific way. Because having seen your movie, I think what's really interesting about it is that watching it, I wasn't really thinking about the race of the director because the movie seems to belong to the women on screen. It's very improvisational, it's very personal, it's very conversational and intimate. It's a road trip. And the ability of the film to create that feeling surpasses, to me, the question of who the director is, because the movie on its own merits is very powerful and honest. So it's strange because, you know, I want black directors, I want directors of every race, if they want to make a movie about dragons, make a movie about dragons. Like or whatever. It's weird to me that we would say, it's weird to me that that would be a disqualifier, that a black filmmaker submitting a movie to a black film festival would not get in because their movie's not about quote-unquote black things, as if black people only have a perspective on black things. Black people have perspectives on everything, like everyone else. You can make it, you know, I don't know, I just think it's really lame. I don't even want to overcomplicate it, it's lame to me in a very obvious way. And I guess when we have these conversations, it's just, I mean, this is a layer of the conversation that I think is related to, but different than the straightforward stay in your lane conversation, because there is this sense with which people of color who get money to make movies are A, generally not getting that money from people of color, and B, often restricted, I think, to making movies about themselves and their own quote-unquote experience on behalf of, I guess, whoever wants to go to Sundance the next year. And I want people of color to be able to make whatever movies they want to make. And if the movie that's in front of you is personal because it is about your students, I can't imagine anything more personal than that. Why wouldn't you be able to make that movie and still be a black filmmaker? I mean, what are they really saying when they tell you that your movie's not qualified for a black film festival because you don't have enough black characters? What are they telling you about your blackness when they say that? I think it's really weird. I mean, this relates to, I used to be a graduate student, and I had friends who were in graduate school who were studying African American studies, but I also had, I mean, the president of Brown was a French scholar, a black woman. And she wasn't only dealing in colonialism, she was dealing in a number of things. And, you know, I want black people to be able to follow their curiosities. If you want to make an anime movie, you know, I do that. I really, these limits that we impose, I think, are harmful. The limits that we impose on white filmmakers, I think, are a little different. And I think that's a different conversation, frankly. But people of color, I just want more voices. I just want more of those creators, more of those filmmakers, more of those actors. I don't know.
You know, I think that, well, thank you for all that, by the way. That's very kind of you to say about Sepulveda. So, I mean, on the one hand, I understand some of the trepidation, I think, to a limited degree. I mean, that's not how I think clearly. I mean, my movie proves that I don't think that way, but I mean, I get that there is a worry that someone is not going to do a good job with, you know, they'll be lazy, they'll put shortcuts, they'll impose their own sort of perspective that it may be inappropriate on that. So I sort of get where some of that fear comes from. I mean, it's certainly happened many times, and you know, it's work. what Sebastián said, taking the trouble to really talk to people. Not everyone wants to do that. They want to just write this thing, and especially male directors, I think, they want to write this thing, from the top of Mount Olympus and throw it down like this is my great work. And there is a lot. Sometimes directors don't want to take the time to really work through making sure that this is okay. And in my case, it was an improvisatory, collaborative film, much more so than my first. And so that was sort of built in. I didn't worry, I think, at all about the fact that, I wasn't, I was neither young nor Latina, because I knew that the young women that were making the film, they were going to have all their input, and it was going to come through. So for me, that wasn't an issue. But I think it demands a different kind of process than I think some directors, often male, aren't as interested in, and maybe they just want to take a shortcut and they just feel like they know. So I get where that comes from. However, I mean, the most exciting artists to me are the ones who never stay in their lane, who always are breaking those kind of rules. Whether, Chester Himes, I'm like a big fanatic of. His second or third novel, Tomorrow Will Make You Cry, he writes, the main character is a white prisoner. I mean, this is a black man writing in the early 50s. And he paid a price for that. It didn't go over well, and people, I would just like to think that things have changed since then. And this kind of goes back to what we said yesterday in the panel. I think that we're in a new century, and everything's changing so fast, and there's a certain fear that what seems to be this change that is here is just sort of ephemeral, is going to go away in a second, and it's going to we'll all have been had. We thought we had progressed, and it hasn't changed. And I just think that can be dangerous in its own way, to constantly view the world through a lens that might have been appropriate in 1978, but in 2018. In a year where you do have, If Beale Street Could Talk and Black Panther and Wrinkle in Time, Insecure, I mean, things are changing. And it's okay to say it out loud. I feel like we think if we say it out loud, it's going to end, like, oh, no, don't say it, because then we'll go back to having no shows and no movies. And to impose the same things on, I can understand maybe in the old days when you never saw black people as protagonists ever. I mean, I can almost understand why people might have feelings about a black creator doing something that wasn't, but in this day and age, I think we can sort of relax, and we can sort of allow people the freedoms. I mean, that's kind of the benefit of the progress, is like freedom for the black creators to start to have more freedom to get to do a Marvel movie or a DC movie, and not have to just do the same kind of realistic kitchen sink realist film about the issues. Someone's always going to do that, and that's fine. And it's like we just need to sort of relax and accept that this is a new era, and stop holding it to judging it by the same way we judge the past.
Okay, so with that, thinking about that, one of the, maybe two other things that I hear coming out of the conversation are, one, there is the anxiety is surrounding sort of what is perceived as a dearth of representation. Like there's just not enough, or that there has just not historically been enough to be able to feel comfortable with, the freedom of exploring different of the person who is directing or the person who is writing not looking like that person. Like the people who are in the film, there has been enough sort of bad faith creations to sort of create that sort of distrust. So that's one layer. And then the second is, we should maybe be able to sort of build that trust. We should be able to build good, if as a black film director who is telling a story about Latinx women, if it's a collaborative experience, you should be able to sort of trust that relationship between those actors and that director to be able to tell a more holistic, resonant story. But I think the question then becomes, how do you create that sense of trust, right? How does it become reciprocated? And thinking about Tyrel too, Sebastián, what kinds of resources, what kinds of research, what kinds of knowledges do you need to have in your toolkit in order to be able to tell those stories outside of, quote unquote, outside of your lane, so that your audience can trust you, can believe that the work that you're doing is in good faith, that you're pursuing something that is creative and thoughtful, but also respectful and responsible.
Well, I believe that if you're coming from a human standpoint, then there's always a place to meet, you know? If your movie is solely political, then it turns into something a little different. But if you're telling a human story, then cultural nuance or social nuance, it's things that you can work out. It's really things that you can work out almost as mathematics, you know? It's like, really, for me, the value of Tyrel, well, it is sort of like how it brings race dynamics to a gray area that I personally hadn't seen before, and I wanted to do that experiment. So it is a little bit of a social experiment, you know. But then, at the same time, I was sort of in charge of Tyrel's alienation, and like I was working with Jason, who's from New Orleans, you know. He's politically involved enough. He's very smart, very spontaneous, very intuitive, and also with 9 other white American dudes that are fairly smart and friends of mine, and you know, like decent people. And we were 11 guys making a movie, and we could figure it out. Like I was asking for all, like I was like any sort of cultural mistake that I might be making, you know, like just point it out, you know. And there sometimes that I would listen, and sometimes I knew that it was not a mistake. I was pushing buttons purposefully, and I'm like, no, we're gonna leave that as is, you know. But just like staying extremely open to learn about those cultural things that are, again, like Wikipedia also kind of data. You know, it's like, this is not how it goes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if somebody wants to make a movie about a middle-class Chilean Catholic family, they can talk to me, and then I will read the screenplay, and I would tell them, like, listen, like, this is not how they really go about having lunch, you know? This is not how it goes. Like, you would do this first, or like, they would eat in the kitchen. Just like cultural nuance, you know? And that is like, it's written stuff. It's like, so I think for me, the most important is what's emotional, what's spiritual, and those are universal values, you know, and you should be able to find them together. Yeah.
Brandon? You, Cameron? Either one? Whoever wants to.
I feel like I just talked. Why don't you say something?
I mean, I can't really answer the question of in terms of making movies. I would just say that as someone who watches a lot of them, too many of them, that something I'm always looking for in these situations, more than just things like nuance, or even just, you know, accuracy, it's just a really complicated sense of the truth of the experience. But these things are so hard to sort of measure without having a movie right in front of you. I think, again, to bring it back to your movie, my sense from that movie was that the women on screen were prominent collaborators. When I sense that the people on screen are prominent collaborators, which is not something I feel about, for example, to be honest, like The Help. I don't get the sense there that people are always collaborators in the vision of that movie. In fact, some of them have said since then that they did not feel that they were. And that's what I'm looking for. I guess I would also just say that, I mean, something that's been on my mind a lot because of recent news with, you know, I don't know if you guys have heard, Lena Dunham has been poached by Steven Spielberg to write a screenplay about a Syrian refugee. All kinds of alarm bells go off when I hear that. Not even just for race reasons, also just subject matter reasons. I just don't understand how one looks at her career and decides that this is who we go with. But I think a thing that's worth always thinking about is funding, access, who in power is hiring whom. And again, the gatekeepers, the people who run festivals, the people who decide what's going to have a life as a movie, their vision, I think, is really important here too, because if they're able to say that something is valid, that a movie that was made by a white filmmaker about black people is valid because they feel that it is and it goes on to win those awards, they're the problem to me too, and also the people who funded that movie. It's not just the director, it's the system. And it's, in this case, it's Steven Spielberg, who could hire anyone as an executive producer who has so many resources, who I'm sure could very easily, or if not easily, like sort of with some effort, find a talented voice who could do this story. I don't know how you land on someone like Lena Dunham, but the problem doesn't begin with Lena Dunham to me. She didn't hire herself. I don't know why she accepted. Just everybody there is wrong. But I think we put too much of this on just directors. It's obviously bigger than that. And like, again, progress to me is not just Ryan Coogler making Black Panther, although that's very important. It is also a studio thinking Iron Man, Ryan Coogler, or another Disney movie, Ava DuVernay. Like thinking of these minority voices in non-quote-unquote minority things as people who can just make movies, who are necessarily going to have more diverse casts than many of their white peers have had, et cetera. But, I'm just really uncomfortable with the idea that like black people can only make movies about what are considered to be black things. Because if you're a black guy who likes anime, like a really good friend of mine, Justin Charity, as a freelancer, he loves anime. He loves anime more than even anyone else that I know. But as a freelancer, if someone needs an anime piece, he was never asked to do anime. He was only ever asked, a black person gets shot. That's when he gets an email. Someone writes a book that's about the problems of race. That's when he gets an email. I think that's super important, but I don't know. I feel like these limits are institutional and systemic. I'm rambling, but.
No, and Lena Dunham, that's been on my mind as I'm talking here the whole time, because I'm saying this, let people, and yeah, I know I was one of the chorus who was like, oh, what, I won't repeat my reaction when I heard it, but, it is very kind of concerning, and with her there's also a matter of the track record and some of the things said, and this fear that they are very sort of congratulatory in hiring a woman writer for a gig, but then they might have opened themselves up to some other issues. I mean, we'll have to see what happens. I mean, maybe Lena will prove us all wrong and deliver this really, spot-on script for a very moving film. We'll have to see.
It's similar. Sorry to interrupt, but
please.
It's really it's really upsetting to hear the news that Lena Dunham was offered that. But then, aren't we contradicting ourselves a little by being so upset of her? I feel that also you never learn if you don't make mistakes. Like, I want to see her fail too. Like, I would love for that movie to come out and be a piece of shit and everybody's like shitting on Lena Dunham and Spielberg. Like, that's how communities learn,
Right.
It's like, okay, yeah, never again. But then you have the case of Quincy Jones asking Spielberg to direct The Color Purple, And Spielberg was also, he was like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you inviting me to do this? Well, he was the hottest director at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason. But I just recently watched this documentary, and then Quincy Jones is saying like, well, you've made movies about aliens, you've never been with them. That was Quincy's answer to Spielberg asking why me to direct The Color Purple, And he did, and it's a great movie, or isn't it? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think it's.
It depends
I don't know.
It depends on the
It's pretty
era,
good.
honestly.
Right.
It really does.
At the time, it was wild. It was a lot of.
It was controversial.
Controversial. I think it's all forgiven at this point, and they just announced they're doing a musical,
But
film
was
of
it
the
was it
musical.
controversial because it was like tone deaf, or just because he had directed it?
I think
Is
both.
that movie still tone deaf?
I think that at the time, and again, it's 1985. There were so few black films, and certainly done at that level, that people were upset that someone else wasn't given an opportunity. And there's some things I think in there that feel very old Hollywood in a way that maybe people felt was inappropriate. I feel like with time, though, people have kind of learned to embrace the film, and it's not nearly as problematic for people as it was. I mean, you also had the whole issue of the story itself, and I remember hearing my mother and grandmother upset that Mr. was just existed on screen when there were so few black men in the movies, and why is it always like that? So some of that has changed with time, I feel, and now, yeah, I think the film's kind of has been sort of forgiven, and that's the other thing. Time is, you never know how time is going to impact any of these projects. And yeah, what at the time seems tone deaf and very problematic, 20 years later, you never know. It may seem even doubly so. It may now, everyone might go, well, what's the problem with that? So.
Well, I mean, I think to be fair, even during the time of Color Purple's release, Jacqueline Bobo does an ethnography of black women readers, and she interviews all of these black women who watched The Color Purple, and she has a very different answer than what I think a lot of black men at the time had. Black women were taking all kinds of productive and thoughtful responses to the text. And so it was a really sort of interesting moment where you have on, popular press, it was, huge controversy and schism and potential boycotts, and part of the reason why the cast got snubbed at the Academy Awards, so on forth. But then you have black women who are like, well, but this movie actually is doing something interesting to us, and this movie is actually showing us different kinds of depictions of ourselves. So then, with that in mind, I want to sort of get to this idea of bodies, because I think one of the things that y'all are all saying is that the experience of who can tell these stories, like people should be able to. People of color should be able to tell a variety of different kinds of stories. Is what you're saying, Cameron. And I think that's what all three of you are saying, just in varying kind of degrees. But I think it's also the experience of the body, like the experience of the person of the body who's telling the story, that I think should also be valued. And I don't think we sort of give enough credit to that. The assumption is that a lot of times, like, well, we just put the person, like we put the woman behind the camera, and thus we can check this box, as opposed to thinking, well, the body and the experience of the woman behind the camera is equally as important as the body itself. And so the knowledges that come with that body should be something that we might value more. So the more research and the conversations that you have with people about the things that you're making and the conversations that you're having, I think those things are also in play, and we can't sort of neutralize y'all's experiences in being able to tell the stories. A couple of panels ago, Jean Graham has This One's for the Ladies, which is playing tonight, and it's a documentary about a taekwondo by day, strip club by night scene where black women all come and congregate and party together. And there was a question during one of those panels where someone asked, like, how do you feel comfortable telling the story about black women, in your male gaze or whatever? And I think, like there's something about that that's sort of getting to the question of the knowledges that y'all have telling these stories in the comfort level. So I think there's also some sort of you also have to be sort of self-conscious, almost sort of be able to sort of take the hit in order to be able to do these kinds of tales that y'all are doing. Does that make sense, or?
I mean, that makes sense, and I think part of what you're talking about is just being a good collaborator.
Yeah.
I think that's your
A
job.
good what, sorry?
A good collaborator.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that's your job as a filmmaker. I think that you need to be sensitive to the conversations that you're having with the people that you're making the movie with. You need to surround yourself. I mean, my understanding, for example, of The Color Purple as a production was that Alice Walker had stipulations about, the proportion of black people involved in the making of that movie who could advise and consult and really guide Steven Spielberg toward a more accurate vision. The extent to which that happens or not has been debated since that movie came out, but it was important to her, and it's important to, I think, most of us, that he's not making that movie in a vacuum, and that he understands that he has to be accountable not only to the people who see the movie, but also to the people who are in the movie, who are behind the scenes, and not just the actors, but also below the line, the music, the cinematography, et cetera, the costumes, et cetera. I think you have to be a good collaborator, and I think also that when you're not, it's just bad art anyway. It's not just bad art because it's bad in a racial sense. It's just often just bad art. I really think that's a bar that all art has to clear. it doesn't matter to me if you're a person of one race making a film about people of another race. I think that your responsibility is, as someone trying to make good art, is to be ears open, ears to the ground, talking to people, understanding what you're making a movie about. Otherwise, it's just gonna be bad art. This is just what a lot of this stuff is to me. It's just, it's not just racist or sexist or whatever. It is also just purely bad art. Bad as art. Just like that episode of Girls that tries to tackle race after everyone wrote a think piece. The episode with Donald Glover. It was bad. It wasn't just bad because of the race stuff, but that was a big part of it. But it was also just a bad episode. It was embarrassing for everybody involved. And we should also just be able to say that. I mean, it's just a label that we should just stick on things. I mean, to answer, Sebastián, one of your earlier questions, I think what makes it not totally hypocritical is that in a world where plenty of Syrian filmmakers are getting a chance to make movies, I really don't care what a white director or writer does in that context. William Styron writes The Confessions of Nat Turner, but I have black literature, so I really don't care what he does. I can ignore that if I have people who know what they're doing, who know what they're talking about. But this is all, this is context. And in a perfect world, I'd be able to ignore the news that someone's getting to make a movie about Syrian refugees who really has no business making that movie, because Syrian refugees would be having a voice to make that kind of movie and every other kind of movie already. I could easily ignore that story if those people had a chance. And I think that's, again, I just think it's about resources. It's about gatekeepers. It's about people with power and money not spreading the wealth. And I think in that condition, if we're all smarter institutionally, then a lot of these other questions, just make your bad movie then, I don't care. It can be a bad movie that can tank, no black people can see it, and then you'll learn your lesson. And then we'll all move on. It'll be a footnote, because we have better art by other better people,
Yeah, and I think that gets lost a lot. So much gets put on the creation of a film or TV show, and people, with cancel culture, people saying we're going to watch this or that. Okay, so taking a look, let's say at Netflix's Iron Fist show was the first one to get canceled after they completely ignored the fans, pretty unanimous fan outcry that say, don't you think it'd be better if this character were Asian or Asian American or at least, half Asian or something, that this is a kind of tone-deaf creation from the 70s, and maybe it's time to update it. And that was pretty loud, that point of view, and they ignored it, and they paid a price for it. The show bombed, and it was the first one to go, and that frankly wasn't the only problem with the show. It just had a lot of issues, but that didn't help, and it was so clear to everyone what a missed opportunity it would have been. So, right, to a point, there's a lot of hand-wringing about these things, even just as ideas, and at some point you do kind of have to say, you just have to sort of step back and let the marketplace sort it out, and people will not respond to it, and hopefully they'll learn their lesson. I think that, and then you watch the second season of Iron Fist, and it's hysterical because they didn't recast, but it's so clear they knew, the whole season's a mea culpa. By the end of the show, the Iron Fist has switched to Jessica Henwick, who's half Singaporean. She's now the Iron Fist. It's so clear that they're really admitting after the fact that, yeah, maybe this was a mistake, and now the show's gone. So sometimes you do just have to let these things play out, like you said, let's just see what Lena Dunham does, and it'll be amazing, and we'll all be shut up and say, well, you did a great job for representing this important story, or it won't. And I do feel like story lessons are sort of being learned. And I know, I trust me, I've been the first to say, lead the cry that, when black films do well, there is this sense that it's always a fluke. Or not just black films. The First Wives Club made a ton of money, and it should have led to more films like The First Wives Club being made, and it didn't. Something's Gotta Give made a ton of money, and it should have led to more films about older people falling in love, and it didn't, because, they claim that green is the only color they care about, but that's clearly not true, and that's not the only motivation. So, but I do feel like they're listening now, and I don't think that, something like Black Panther really can't be. You'll notice there really wasn't much talk about it as this sort of fluke that came out of nowhere. People were just like, yeah, this is what the audience wanted, and this is, this, and then they were smart to listen and deliver, and it seems like the lessons are being learned finally. And then back to what Cameron said about, Ryan Coogler getting to do Iron Man, and then Ava DuVernay gets hired to do New Gods for DC. That's like a completely, that's some really deep comic nerd stuff that has really not much to do with race in that sense. I guess they're alien races that are fighting each other, but it's like Dune. It's this thing. And then Marvel counters by hiring Chloe Zhao to do the Eternals, which is basically the same thing. It's just the one is DC and one is Marvel. And now Chloe Zhao, after like 2 tiny films, is going to get her shot to do this. So. Yeah, I think that it's like we'll be having a totally different conversation in 2 years, I think, if we come back to this street and this panel about the same thing. I hope that it just seems like there are things that we can see that are pointing to that some of the business as usual is kind of going by the wayside. People are finally sort of figuring out, and people are getting chances they haven't had in the past.
So let's open it up to the audience. What questions do y'all have for our panelists?
This is the problem that every institution is facing right now, right? As someone working in journalism, the problem of magazines hiring writers of color but not editors of color means that there aren't people of color in power, and really it's a matter of, it's about power. I think the only way to solve those kinds of problems is for people of color to get to have positions of power, but who's going to hire them to do that? It's going to have to be white people who have the positions currently. And I think that's, people who are finding ways around that are, for example, Ava DuVernay starting Array Films, who is supporting films by women of color in particular, but women broadly, distributing them, producing them, et cetera, getting them onto Netflix really quickly, and helping people find a platform that way. But Ava DuVernay is also a particularly keen talent for that kind of work. I think for many people, Kevin Hart is someone who starts his own production company, makes a ton of money because he knows how much he's worth to Sony, and he knows that even though Sony's not, as those emails revealed, supporting him necessarily, that he's a moneymaker, so he knows that he can start producing his own movies. Melissa McCarthy has her husband direct her movies so that she can have more creative control. There are ways that people are finding ways around this, but ultimately it's about power structures. And I think people's model is to build alternative power structures and then getting into the conversation that way. But build alternative power structures, it's so much easier said than done. And Array didn't just come out of nowhere. It was something that was years in the making. But Ava DuVernay is someone who is using her visibility and her clout not only to make more big movies. A Wrinkle in Time, for whatever you can say about whether or not you liked it, was a $100 million movie directed by a black woman for Disney, which is a really big deal. And it made money. Was it the movie that everyone wanted it to be? I don't know. But it is important that she was able to do that, and it's important that she wants to use some of that money to fund other women of color in particular. But again, it's always about power. I think the example of Chloe Zhao is really important because she's someone who is making tiny movies with the help of places like Sundance, et cetera. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens to her in the space of of the superhero industrial complex. Ryan Coogler is fascinating because I would bet that now that he's making Black Panther 2, the amount of control he gets to have over that movie is going to hopefully increase. Jordan Peele, I would hope, my understanding is that that Blumhouse's attitude toward Get Out was, let's say, different before it became a big deal. But that now that it is a big deal and that he's making other projects, he now has more power. These are just ways. I don't have a systemic answer but these are just ways that these people are finding their way, worming their way into positions of power, and trying to do with it what they can. But it's imperfect. It's unfair.
Let me just say that, Ava, it is a huge deal that she got to direct Wrinkle in Time. It's almost a bigger deal that she got New Gods when Wrinkle in Time, underperformed. It has the air, for whatever the numbers are, it has the air that it was a disappointment. And the fact that they're giving her another big film, that's pretty huge. Like, this is the kind of thing that people complain all the time, that, only white boys, only Bryan Singer gets to walk off a set and never finish a film and then gets hired for a vast sum of money to direct another film. So maybe that's the goal, is that, we can make our films that don't do well and get hired to do another film. And I don't want us walking off sets, but, maybe that's when we've arrived, when the same kind of thing is not a career killer for women or people of color. And, we're kind of getting there. Lynn Ramsey, who I'm a huge fan of, I'm teaching a class on our films next quarter, she walked off. She didn't show up for a film. And that could have been a career killer, like literally 10 years ago. And she bounced back. She's continuing to make films. So as much as I at least fancy myself a pessimist, I feel like these are fairly good signs that there's actually some substantial change happening, and not just the usual lip service. That's not to say these things aren't cyclical, but this is all these are new things, and it's not, I don't think it's wise to sort of dismiss it as just, oh yeah, that's just superficial. No. The fact that Lynn Ramsey got to work again is a kind of a big deal. The fact that Ava gets another epic, she doesn't have to go back and do another, movie for $1 million and work her way back up to a $100 million budget, that's a big deal.
Yes, sir.
So what?
Present the characters.
That was you.
Wait, I'm confused. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
So the question is, I think, Sebastian, you made the comment that your characters are themselves first and then whatever additives next, right? So gendered, race, sexualized.
Mm-hmm.
How do you I guess the question is, does everyone do the rest of the panelists agree with that assessment? Yeah.
What do you guys think?
It's complicated. Again, I think, as has been stated, I think it's an extra hurdle if you are not you don't share the exact identity of your character. And I say that as someone who has made films where the protagonists are of different ethnicities, and I've made films where women are mainly the characters in it. I think it's, what's to say is that, if you are invested in that character's humanity, and again, the other key really important thing is being collaborative. Not assuming that, well, I'm a human and I know how humans are, so it'll all be fine if I just come from this place of humanity. Like, well, yeah, that's true, but as Sebastián said, he also consulted people and has a collaborative relationship with his actor to make sure that the places where he maybe had blind spots, they would let him know. And maybe he says thank you very much and corrects, and maybe he's like, I thank you for telling me, but let's go push ahead because I didn't want to. That's the button I want to push in this scene. So, I understand what you're saying. Like, isn't that a little simplistic to just say that just be human and you'll be fine? But I think it's more than what he's saying is more than that, and I think that it's about having, again, the process of being aware that, right, if you are making this choice, then you just have to do a little more work and be open to it and be open and humble, and you can make it happen. Because, Lord knows plenty of really damaging films about black people are made by black people. I can say that specifically. And that dehumanize people or dehumanize black women made by black men all the time. So just being that, having that identity, I think sometimes we put too much faith in that, like, well, then I'm this and therefore I know, and then, that's not always healthy either. At least that's my take.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because I feel like that's something that we don't talk enough about, that like it's not just enough to be the thing, you still have to do the work, always. I will say I don't always know how to decouple identity from humanity, but accordingly, I think respecting my humanity means having a curiosity about my identity. There's nothing that I like to hear less than I don't see race or some bullshit like that. No, the question of humanity is bound up in identity, but limiting me to the superficiality of identity is where we run into problems. But I will never want to, there's a part of me that just hears this, over and over again, I'm not black, I'm OJ. It's like the worst thing that anyone's ever said. As a thing that none of us should ever honor as an idea. But it is also true that acting with humanity and empathy means being sensitive to identity, but understanding that identity, even something like black identity, just means so many things. That there's not one black experience, that we're a polity, that we have a lot of experiences. I just think it's about paying attention to these things, and I think it is a matter of humanism. If you know that you have to pay attention and you know that you have to do the work, and then you go do it. It's about empathy and stuff like that.
Yeah, just to further my answer, I think that what I'm an expert, as I said, it was more alienation. That was of course there is a race factor in my movie. The character's name is Tyler, and the movie is called Tyrel, and it's because one of the white guys calls him Tyrel accidentally. So the movie, it's a microaggression on itself, the name of it, And it's a movie that is somehow putting out there for Tyler specifically. He's going through a weekend of sort of paranoia and alienation where there's no, I'm just going to give you a little bit of what the movie is about so there's context to my answer, but it's nobody's overtly racist or mean to him, or nobody's trying to make him feel bad in any possible way, but the lack of sensitivity or the lack of awareness, political awareness from these white guys is making him feel that way. And he's unsure how to feel about them. And for the same reason, he's unsure about how he feels about himself. So that was the conflict that I was dealing with in the movie. It was sort of like an identity crisis that Tyler is going through, And it's something that, and then this might sound very naive, but from somebody that comes from Chile, where I never really saw any black person growing up. There's really no black people down in South America. Just now that there's more immigrants from Haiti and Colombia, but nobody, And I came to the States when I was 20 years ago, when I was 19, and it is shocking. It is really shocking, the clusterfuck of race in America, and it's something that I feel that race in America, yes, of course, it belongs more to Americans, but we've been witnesses. There are witnesses. It's part of history. So I don't think there's nothing wrong with sort of feeling curious or feeling empathetic about a struggle that is not yours. And as a gay man, I celebrate people that are not gay that are concerned with the struggle of gay people, you know? And like, you need, and I'm not saying that I made this movie because I'm an ally, and I'm not saying that I'm not an ally, but it was not my motivation to create any sort of like I'm not lecturing with my movie. I'm really doing a sociological sort of character study, and I'm sort of just putting out there what I've witnessed for 20 years in America. One of the things that I've witnessed, you know, and is the alienation of a black man among white people that have not done anything yet. This specifically group of people have not done anything harmful, but they've been just kind of generous and welcoming, but yet their lack of sensitivity because of history and white privilege, it's hurting regardless, without their sort of effort to hurt. And that was the specificity of the story that I wanted to tell. So I was mostly concerned with the psychological struggle of my character, which it is pretty directly related to race in this case, but also by being a new person in a new environment. And then I had Jason, who was helping me with the cultural nuances, you know, and the rest of the guys there. Things that a Chilean might not know, you know?
Last question. The question is, in terms of your preparation and in preparing for the job that you have and knowing who these characters are, is there a moment where you feel like you're ready to go, like you know it well enough and feel like you can pursue it with, of course, like the position that maybe you will fail?
In my case with Sepulveda, not really. There's really no moment where like I feel like, okay, I think we can do this. It's a constant process. It starts the first time we all sat down, myself and my wife and the three leads, to talk about it and to ask them to read what we'd started with and for them to sort of take it in the direction they wanted. And then, you know, they came and they looked at cuts, and it's an ongoing thing. I think that the danger I was very aware of was like to not feel like, oh, you know, I'm from LA, I've been around Latinos my, whole life, and, I got this. It was like I never wanted to feel like there at some point it had been sort of figured out or anything. So just this constant process of staying humble and inquiry, which you should be doing as a creative person the whole time anyway. You should be sort of asking questions about the work as it's taking shape. You do what you're making your changes, your cuts and so forth, but you're always sort of looking at it and having dialogues with your inner circle about how it reads and if it's saying what you want it to say, and if it isn't, how to fix that. I always remember my thesis film from UCLA was about a kept woman, and I'll never forget a older woman who read it and said, the first thing she said to me is this: well, it's not feminist because this is too much about her leaving her sugar daddy for the boyfriend. Great, I needed to hear that, and I put her into the thank yous on the credits, because yeah, that totally changed. Even though I thought I was being really sensitive and aware, I made that change, and it made the films better for it. So you just have to always But that's like kind of the fun of it, is to always to stretch and go but be listening.
I gotta say that, like, for me, not because a movie is politically correct, the movie is better. On the contrary, and I think it's a very tricky line, because when you're writing your screenplay and you're just making sure that every character is a politically correct portrayal of somebody, then you're being censored by what's politically correct. And politically correctness is not something that we're surrounded by. It's really part of the world, it's part of existence, it's part of how fucked up humanity is, that is completely self-destroying itself from ancient times. Like, we're heading towards nuclear war, Like, we are a shitty species, and then we need to portray how shitty we are in movies too. And I think that it's very infantile to not address that. And I remember writing a scene where it was very misogynistic. The scene was misogynistic, or there was something, there was a portrayal of women, or the treatment that women were getting on the scene that was awful, And then a woman read it, and she's like, this is highly misogynistic. And I'm like, I'm aware of it. I'm not going to change it because it's misogynistic. My screenplay is not a human being that is going to therapy. My screenplay is not trying to get better as a person. My screenplay is a story, And stories can be cruel, and stories can be racist, and stories could be misogynistic too. And I think that avoiding those things in storytelling, it's censorship, and that I'm very scared of as well.
I guess I'll just say, as someone writing about movies, I have never felt totally prepared. Because movies ideally are about everything, anything. And great movies always teach you something. And I think as a critic, I should never be in the position to feel like I'm automatically equipped to write on something. I think I should always be in the position of feeling like I have to meet the movie where it is, and I have to rise to the challenge of the movie. It also just is a headache because it means, because there's so many movies, and because that responsibility is really consuming. But I think that's the job. I'm looking right now at the poster for Wanda, which is like a classic, super, super, super important film that I return to again and again because it teaches me something not only about movies broadly, but about women's cinema and about her perspective, specifically Barbara Loden's. And I just think it's an art form. It's always changing. I think you always have to rise to the challenge. And I think that any critic in particular who does not feel that they have to rise to the challenge, even of films that are by people of the same race, I think is being dishonest and is being irresponsible. Because once you throw in things like gender and class and geography and time and all, history, all these things, like there aren't that many movies about gay black kids growing up in the suburbs of New Jersey. And even if that movie came out, I wouldn't feel totally prepared to write on it because that's not me, that's someone like me. I really don't know how artists face this question, but I just know that I always feel like I have to do the work, always.
But I feel, sorry to, this is going to be short, but that movie Call Me By Your Name, which was highly acclaimed by critics, and everybody called it a love story. And I'm gay, and I didn't think it was a love story. I think it was a story of infatuation and predatory behavior, And not for that reason, I find that movie to be a piece of shit movie. And I want that movie to be out there, I like that movie, but I don't consider that movie to be a love story. But not because I find the older guy to be a predator, I'm against the movie. There is a movie by Louis Malle called The Murmur of the Heart, which is a movie that somehow supports incestuous relationship between a mother and a child. And not because I don't convey with the morals of the movie, I'm gonna attack the movie. I find that movie is fucking beautiful. I love The Murmur of the Heart, but I don't wanna fuck my mom. And there is a huge
You can quote him.
But there is a big difference there. You are not the movie. Society is not the movie. The movie does not represent what society has to be. The movie, it's a movie. It's a piece of art in itself, If we don't have destructive pieces of art, then we might as well just like, I don't know, watch Disney movies from the, no, those are awful. Wait a minute, I like those.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
I don't know,
I mean,
but
I
yeah.
think it is important, just to sum it all up, I think it's important to both think about the complexity of characters and their humanity, that people can be flawed, that we're not looking for the best or the worst of people, but that they should be something in between, and also that there's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation between you watching a film that is deeply problematic and then you going out and
Right.
thinking that the world is that. I think that's also the piece.
I think it's ultimately really about tone deaf. Like, you cannot allow your movie to be tone deaf. You can talk about whatever you want, but you cannot sin of ignorance, you know?
Yeah.
Cultural or social ignorance. That's too lazy. Just
And
to
people
let it
should
happen.
feel free to call a movie a piece of shit if that's what it is.
And on that note, we have to stop. This is fabulous. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, panelists.